Hi, and welcome to the Virtual Coach Advantage podcast from Springboard Future. I'm Emma Calvert, co-founder and coach at Springboard Future and our podcast host. And joining me today is Neela Bettridge, our master coach and co-founder. On our last podcast, Neela and I talked about how you as an individual, as a leader and a manager can face the black swan. This is part 2 of the podcast, and today we're going to be talking about what organisations can do in times of crisis, not only to survive, but also to thrive. Neela, how do we start to apply this to organisations and how they face black swan event moments?
Well, this is based on my experience this year, actually, of organisations that I've seen do this really well and organisations that are still struggling. What seems to mark them out is an ability to not jump in and try and solve everything immediately, but to actually be able to stand back for a moment. And actually, they've incorporated that into the way their teams work. So there is a period of reflection, weekly, monthly, whatever it may be, that teams do on how they're navigating. So if you think about the boat analogy, it's the same thing. You wouldn't just get in your boat and assume just because you got the navigation on and you're going north that it's going to continue going that way, particularly in a stormy sea. You would keep looking, refreshing, and speaking to the crew. And what I've noticed is that organizations that do that regularly and have it within diaries are navigating this much, much better. The other thing that I've noticed is some of these organizations which are doing it well are then able to turn it into innovation opportunities, but they are also really strict with boundaries around people and meetings morning, noon, and night. They encourage people to take time off. They have corporate breaks in the diary where no emails or meetings are taking place. I'm dealing with a company at the moment, actually, phenomenal. Nobody's allowed to send an email between, I think it's 5 p.m. through to 10 a.m. And you're not allowed to put meetings in at certain times of the day. So people actually get time to work, and it's corporate, everybody. And if you do, there's all hell to pay. I just think these are the sorts of things, really, they sound very simple. They're very practical, but they enable people to navigate. And then the organizations who are not doing it so well are the ones that are jumping from crisis to crisis to crisis, no reflection time, people overworked, very, very stressed. So if you think about Schwartz's model, they have no time to do any of those 4 things. And if we think about a department, a team, an organization as being a culmination of individuals, if nobody's allowed time to do these things, it will end in disaster.
There's so much in there, Neela. I don't even know where to begin. Firstly, great practical tips. And I really like the framework. If you're going to make change, you're going to survive and set your way of working out during these black swan events, it does need a framework for people. So I think that's a really big tip for people. I want to dive into a couple of things that you've raised there. You talked about refreshing where you're heading to, talking to the crew. I got the sense of, all being in it together. But actually, that takes a lot of courage from a leader, doesn't it? The kind of stepping back, reflecting, appraising. Are we still going in the direction we thought we were? And also, there's a lot of trust, isn't there, that is needed if you're going to talk to the crew and really take on board what they're saying.
There is. What I'm not suggesting is that the leader doesn't have a clear sense of purpose or vision for the organization or the department. It may be that it needs tweaking. And I think, interestingly, I was working with a leader yesterday, very senior leader, and I said to him, what's been your key learning in this last year? And he said, you know what? I never used to do it, and I've done it this year, and it's all about collaboration and co-creation. And the most difficult problems that I've had to deal with, I have dealt with really brilliantly because I've dealt with my team, and I've been vulnerable about the fact that I don't have all the answers. And I just thought, how brilliant. That's really it. You don't have to be the hero leader in this. But that doesn't mean you don't lead. You just lead in a slightly different way.
Yeah, I mean, you're exactly talking about modern day leadership, aren't you? Showing that vulnerability, not having all of the answers, There's a phrase that coaches and psychologists talk about a lot, which is psychological safety. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that, Neela?
Yeah, I think this is actually really important. And that's the other thing, actually, I've noticed on these successful teams is the leader creates psychological safety. And psychological safety of teams is predicated on trust. It's predicated on the ability to fail. So, if you're on choppy waters, you might fail, the ability to speak up. And you notice this in the teams. And these characteristics in Black Swan events are really, really, really important. They help team navigate this much better than other teams I've seen who don't have this in place, where they're backbiting, they're point scoring, they're politicizing. They just get on with it, and they have the very difficult conversations that they need to have in order to solve things.
It's so important. And, one of the other things that you're sort of talking about when you talk about reflection and how are we getting there and how are we doing? I like to take something from personal crisis. In personal crisis coaching and therapy, we talk about building a fence, building a fence around what's working well and what isn't working well. So not everything in this time is going to be a problem, is it, Neela?
No, it isn't. Not everything within the fence is going to be a problem. Some things may be opportunities. But actually, it's a really good analogy that you've made there, Emma, because if you're in a state and you are not reflecting, you may completely miss the things which are opportunities in your boundary or outside the boundary because you're in such a flat that you actually don't see them. And that's the other reason I like that analogy about building a fence, because I think that really says what it needs to say on the packet.
Yeah, and the other thing that was starting to pop into my mind, Neela, when we were talking about all of this, particularly in the context of if we use COVID as a black swan event, we can even go back and look at past events like the financial crash, in 2008, 2009. Is I know we as individuals, but also as organisations, we like to think we're pretty unique, but actually, when you boil the issues down, we're broadly the same, aren't we?
So true. I mean, literally, it doesn't matter which part of the world I'm working in, with which team, whether they're virtual or very close or never seen each other, the same issues keep coming up time and time again in this Black Swan event. And the most important one, the one they stand or fall on, is relationship and trust. If they don't have that in place, it is very difficult for them to navigate.
And in there is something for me around communication. So it's the communication and how you treat each other in that, isn't it?
It is, particularly when things get difficult. It's all very well being nice to each other when things are great, but when you're really up against it and you're having to really find solutions together, how do you deal with each other? How do you have tricky conversations? How do you common ground things? How do you respect each other while still pushing the envelope? How do you hold each other to account? All these things, really, really important.
Yeah, and a real danger. Nina, what are some of the other dangers that you see
Within teams,
and organisations?
other than an unclear vision and lack of communication, you do still see some of the sort of hero leaders leading. And I think that's not helpful to organizations. And the reason I'm hesitating is I actually want to give you an example of an organization I'm working with at the moment where the leadership think that everything is just really, really great. And they keep asking their workforce, they're about 2,500 people, to do more and more and more. And what they haven't recognized is how tired these people are and how absolutely exhausted they are. They're just about to fall over, all these people. And I think sometimes there can be a lack of a link between the exec board and actually what is going on in the organization, because people give them the good messages. They don't tell them what's going on at the ground level. They hide it. That is really dangerous. And I see that in quite a few organizations at the moment.
Yeah, not being real about what the problems are. Yeah, it's a real danger. The other one that springs to mind in moments of crisis is over reliance on past successes. There's a lot to take. There's certainly confidence to take from your past successes, but just because it's worked for you before doesn't mean it's going to work for you again.
Exactly. And in fact, indeed, it may not work at all. And actually, one of the things that I think is really important in these kind of situations is to allow your mavericks out, the innovators, the people who sometimes may be seen as troublemakers, but they may have the solutions. I'm quite interested how mavericks come to the fore in these kind of environments, because actually what's worked for you before may not work for you now. And, it needs a fresh look, it needs a new look.
Oh, yeah, let's talk a little bit more about Mavericks. I consider myself one secretly. You talked, start this conversation about innovation and the opportunity in a Black Swan event for organisations. So, can we talk about innovation and can we talk about these Mavericks? Because they can be tricky.
They can be tricky, and people find them difficult to handle, and they can find them they won't fit into any boxes. And I actually love the Mavericks. I find them really enjoyable.
That's why you
But
love me, Neela.
that's right. But what I've also noticed, yes, some organisations are having a difficult time, but there's also at the moment, I mean, if you look at the growth in the tech sectors in the UK, they're doing brilliantly. It's because they're responding to real issues going on, they're innovating, and there are some real interesting mavericks leading them who are the entrepreneurs of the future. When you have Black Swan events, that's what happens. The mavericks come up. They're allowed to operate, before they get pushed down. But now in these kind of situations, they're allowed to come forth. And I think they're an interesting bunch. And I think they have the ability to help us innovate our way out of these situations. I mean, if you think about the war 70 years ago, 80 years ago, after that, think of the innovation that happened. The mavericks came through. They really came through. New ideas, new industries, new ways of doing things. So Black Swans, I think, are like every change curve, very, very interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And this has been a very interesting conversation. We've talked about having that honest reflection point, what's working for us, what isn't, that trust, that confidence in each other, that collaboration. Because ultimately, you will get through this if you do all of these things, and actually, there could be some opportunity. Well, I've loved talking to you about this topic, Neela, over the past 2 weeks. It's been really, really interesting. And I'm very excited for our next podcast, which is EQ versus IQ. And perhaps we're going to have a bit of a dig around into my controversial belief that EQ is more important than IQ for leaders. So do join us for that. Well, thanks for listening today. We do hope you've enjoyed our podcast. As ever, we'd love to hear your feedback, any comments or requests that you've got for topics. You can reach us at our website, springboardfuture.com, or follow us on LinkedIn or Twitter. Don't forget to join us for our next podcast. Thanks for joining the Virtual Coach Advantage podcast. We hope to coach you again soon.